the word "ke" may mean "that is," or it may mean "and." And since Paul everywhere else makes no distinction between a Jewish and a pagan Christian, a non-Jewish Christian, I think Michael Brown, with great respect, is just wrong there. I don't know if it's possible for you to show on our screen a number of translations. Do you have that available, of Galatians 6:16? If you have them, there we go. Okay. Peace and mercy to all who follow this rule, to the Israel of God. Not a distinction. May God's peace and mercy be upon all who live by this principle. They are, that's to say, the new people of God. Mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. The "and" there, I think, is explanatory what he means by upon these people. Peace and mercy in the Berean Study Bible to all who walk by this rule. Peace, mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. There, it's a little bit ambiguous. The next one, many other translations would agree with my translation. Peace and mercy be upon them, namely the Israel of God. I do that because I think Paul, otherwise, in other places, calls us the true Israel of God, the true people of God. We are the commonwealth of Israel. We're the true Israelite people. Israel of the flesh, what I might call ethnic Israel, what we call Jews today, wherever they are, in Israel, certainly some of them, they would be physical Israel, national Israel. However, the international group of Christians is known as the Commonwealth of God, God's true people, and it's entirely natural and very proper for Paul to say, peace be upon you, namely the in the Galatians passage 6:16, namely the Israel of God, God's true Israel. So I think that Michael Brown is wrong there, with great respect, and most of the translations would back me up. They would make that Israel of God another way of saying the people of God. Why not?
The Net Bible at the bottom there. So they
Good.
translate peace and mercy be on them and on the Israel of God. And they say at the bottom here, if you can see it, the word "que" and
Yes. Mhm.
can be interpreted in two ways. It could be rendered as "also," which would indicate that two distinct groups are in view, namely, all who will behave in accordance with this rule and the
Mhm.
Israel of God.
Yep.
Or two, it could be rendered "even,"
Mhm.
which would indicate that all who believe in accordance with this rule are the Israel of God.
Yes.
In other words, in this latter view, the word "even" equals the phrase "that is."
And they leave it open in that commentary. But I'm quite convinced in my own mind that Paul is not suddenly dividing the church of God into the Israel of God, the Jewish element, and the rest of them, the Gentile element. That would be contrary to his whole thinking. So we do not want to give our identity away, the Israel of God identity. Don't give it away to somebody else or to some other group exclusively and separated from us. No, we are the commonwealth. We're the true people of the true God. If we are Christians, doesn't matter what national background we come from. So I take that "ke" there, that "and," as what they say, epexegetical, meaning explanatory. Peace be upon you, namely the Israel of God. That's where I would come down on that question.
Matthew 19:28, Jesus speaking to his 12, the apostles,
Mm-hmm.
he tells them that be sure, amen,
Yes.
truly, that at the palingenesia,
Yes.
at the restoration or regeneration of the world and all things, the new heavens, new earth, etc. In other words, in the age to come, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you, now
Mm-hmm.
he's speaking to the 12, who have followed me, will also sit on 12 thrones,
Yes.
judging the 12 tribes of
Mm-hmm.
Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this intrigues me because we believe that the church will be resurrected first.
Yeah.
At the first resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
that is taught in Revelation 20. So there's a first and a second resurrection.
Hmm.
So at the parousia, Christ will raise the 12,
Yep.
his apostles.
Hmm.
Will be raised, we believe, to immortality. And this 12, Jesus says, you will judge or rule or govern 12 tribes of Israel. Now, who are the 12 tribes? That is the nation of Israel, the present day nation of Israel. There will be a remnant,
Hmm.
a group of Jews who will come to believe, to faith at the parousia. They will be allowed to live in the kingdom
Yes.
as mortals, with along with the other remnants of the other nations, other people
Hmm.
who survived from the nations. Survivors from the nations, Ezekiel 32, Zechariah 14, Isaiah 19. It's all over the Old Testament that there will
Hmm.
be survivors from the nations, not Christians' first resurrection, but mortal
Yeah.
people who will be allowed to live in the kingdom under the church.
Yep.
We will govern the world, right? 1 Corinthians
Yes.
6. But
Yeah, no, I think that's right. There's in 1 Corinthians 10:18, the New American Standard Version has look at the nation Israel. Literally, look at Israel. And there he's talking about the nation of Israel, the ethnic Jew, nation of Israel after the flesh. He uses that phrase, does he not? Israel after the flesh. And that means, of course, that he has in mind also an Israel of the Spirit, and that would be the Israel of God of Galatians 6:16. But that would make a clear distinction between two types of Israel, yes.
yeah, so it's an interesting look into the kingdom age
Hmm.
and how, Christians will govern the world, the new world. And if there's a kingdom, there has to be first kings
Hmm.
and then subjects. So we will be kings and priests.
Yes.
Peter applies that Old Testament text to the church, kings and priests, right? We are being built into a nation, a new nation of God.
Hmm.